Gary Coleman, the child star of TV's Different Strokes, dies in 2010, and the darkest secrets of his life are revealed.
Gary was not, I don't think, a very happy child, and he wasn't allowed really to be a child.
He was extremely self-loathing. He did not believe in himself. He felt at some point that he became God's punching bag.
He is just the latest victim of a curse that has already touched two of his former co-stars.
Here are child stars who were sort of unsupervised, and we didn't think about the impact of living a Hollywood lifestyle.
And the events leading up to Gary's death raise all sorts of questions.
The Santa Quin police had an open file for some period of time because of the nature of his death.
He was in fear of his life, simply in fear for his life, his physical safety.
May 26, 2010, former child star Gary Coleman plunges down a flight of stairs in his Santa Quin, Utah home.
In the center of the house, there was a stairwell that went up to the bedroom area. The last flight of stairs before you reached the bottom of where the kitchen floor was approximately 5 to 8 feet.
Gary's wife, Shannon, is startled by the sound. Upon finding Gary, she dials 911.
She said her husband fell down the stairs and he was at the bottom of the stairs bleeding. And the dispatcher was trying to tell Shannon to go to her husband's aid, put something on the wound to keep it, to control the bleeding and, keep him still until help arrived.
But Shannon is initially too squeamish to follow through.
She said the sight of blood would make her have a seizure, so she couldn't go anywhere near that.
Shannon, who has a history of seizures, is at least able to give Gary a towel to help stop the bleeding. Gary is rushed to hospital. For now, there is still hope.
He was actually conscious and talking to the emergency personnel during his transfer to the hospital.
Gary's fall makes national news. He shows progress the next morning, but on May 27th, he lapses into a coma. With Gary's chances of recovery fading fast, doctors offer Shannon the option of discontinuing life support. Gary's friends and family are desperate to find out what's going on.
I said to her, I need the name of the hospital because I need to get to Utah. Immediately, I'm going to get on a plane. She says, no, don't do that. Don't do that. That's just not necessary. I have to go. And the next thing I heard was a dial tone.
Gary has been estranged from his parents, Willie and Sue, for over 20 years.
Sue Coleman could not get in touch with his wife to find out what was going on. And she called the sheriff in Utah to go to the hospital and asked the wife to call her.
But Sue is too late. Shannon authorizes hospital staff to terminate life support. Only after that does she leave messages with the Colemans and with Gary's friend Dion.
I was driving and I received a text from Shannon that simply said, I did it. He's gone.
Gary Coleman, age 42, dies at 12:05 p.m. on May 28, 2010 from an intracranial brain hemorrhage. The world has lost a true original.
He's just an interesting guy. Kind of sad sometimes, and at other times real happy-go-lucky, and would go back and forth depending on the circumstances.
One of the most creative people I'd ever seen. Energy, intelligence, vibrance, I should say boundless energy.
In 1978, Gary's TV show Different Strokes turns the diminutive actor into a star, all before the age of 11.
You went home on Friday nights and you couldn't wait to see Gary Coleman because he just brought joy to everybody.
In the 1970s, Gary Coleman was it. He had the charm. and the affability. And I think, again, that idea of being able to have African Americans that could easily come into your living room and become part of your family, and in a sense that were not threatening whatsoever, I think had a huge appeal to an American audience.
2010, as Gary's parents seek custody of their son's body, 3 separate people come forward with documents naming them as Gary's personal representative. The fate of the actor's estate is anything but clear.
The possible contenders were Dion Mall, who had been identified as the personal representative or executor of the estate in an early will by Mr. Coleman back in the 90s. Anna Gray, who was identified similarly in a later will as either the executor or personal representative. And then, of course, there was Shannon Price, who was claiming that she was the common law spouse of Mr. Coleman and would potentially have priority.
Shannon and her lawyer have Gary's handwritten codicil or amendment to another will from 2005 to back up their claim.
The codicil did not revoke any previous will. It's like an amendment. It would have changed whatever the current will out there would be.
3 days later, Anna Gray, a friend of Gary's, files an original will from 2005 naming her as the late actor's executor. Such contradictory planning is an oversight that was typical of Gary.
That's simply characteristic of the loose ends that Gary would leave in his business left to his own devices.
Gary's former agent, Vic Perillo, attends a memorial in Gary's native Illinois.
It was very moving. Gave a speech. Minister gave a speech. Willie and Sue got up, talked. And people that were close to him got up and talked.
Robert Malcolm, Gary's agent at the time of his death, organizes another memorial for Gary's friends in L.A.
There were not many people, maybe 20 or 25 people, and people got up and spoke. And these were people who all had an intimate relationship with Gary. I wish more people would have shown, but for whatever reason, they couldn't make it. But it was really lovely. It was a celebration of life, not of death.
Right away, some begin to question the true motives of those fighting over the late actor's estate.
Very interesting what happened in Utah. You know, they all come running out there to claim the train sets belong to me, this belongs to me, I'm his, I was in the will, no, I was in the will.
While others are immediately suspicious of Shannon's story.
She provided me with the story that she has provided to the public and to the authorities many times, that somehow he slipped and hit his head. All by himself.
The battle over Gary's estate pits Gary's friends and family members against each other.
There was no way that I was going to rest and allow something that bogus to actually prevail.
Everyone was sort of suspicious at that point in time as to who she was, how was she able to do this, was it legal for her to do it?
In 2010, child actor Gary Coleman dies from a brain hemorrhage and leaves behind a messy paper trail naming 3 separate executors. It's just the latest development in a life plagued with complications. Gary Wayne Coleman is born on February 8, 1968 in Zion, Illinois. He's adopted as an infant by Willie and Sue Coleman and diagnosed with nephritis, a potentially fatal kidney condition. Young Gary undergoes his first kidney transplant at the age of 5. The operation's a success, but because of the many pills he pops each day, doctors explain that he will never top 5 feet.
As a result of having the transplant, it was necessary for him to take immunosuppressant drugs, which stunted his growth and brought about this fullness in his face and cheeks.
The ambitious youngster doesn't let that deter him. He wants to become an actor.
He wanted to model for the Sears catalog. And naturally, when the ad agencies met him, they flipped over him.
With agent Vic Perillo's help, Gary lands his first acting job in a local bank commercial. Before he knows it, he's up for a part in a reboot of television's The Little Rascals. But there's one slight obstacle.
The Norman Lear organization was looking for a little girl to play in the remake of the Our Gang comedies. And I insisted that they meet him even though they were looking for a little girl. And they did.
Gary gets the gig. Although the reincarnation of the Little Rascals dies a quick death, the show's producer, Norman Lear, is eager to find the right vehicle for the young actor. He finds it in a new series called Different Strokes.
Normally, as you know, shows have to be piloted, but they merely took Gary and Conrad Bain and went into the office at NBC and they did a scene and that was it. There was never a pilot on that show.
The network greenlights the show, and Gary lands his first regular paycheck at age 10. He has to move to Los Angeles, where the show is produced. Gary's parents, who are not industry people, drop everything to follow their son.
Gary said, I want both my parents with me because the show was given an 8-year contract run, and they gave up their jobs to come out to be with him.
Work on Different Strokes begins in 1978. Todd Bridges co-stars as Gary's brother Willis, and Dana Plato plays his adoptive sister Kimberly.
Dana was the sweetest thing you'd ever meet, and Todd was a little kid at the time.
They were very close, and just as one might expect, given the fact that they had to spend so much time together, they bonded. And they had roller skates, and they built spaceships together in the classroom on set.
They grew up on the show. It was a family.
The show premieres on November 3rd, 1978. Charismatic Gary Coleman turns NBC's sagging Friday night ratings into primetime gold as the precocious, newly orphaned Arnold Jackson.
I remember after the first episode of Different Strokes on the set, going over to him and said, Gary, how do you do this thing, this acting? How do you do it? He said, look, when the director tells me to laugh, I laugh. When he tells me to cry, I cry, and I don't want to talk about it. Let's go, play with the trains.
He was very smart and witty, and I think he played into sort of a history of characters that African Americans had portrayed on television, but he sort of took it to even like another level.
The directors and the writers would say to me afterwards, this kid where does he come from? He knows all about, he knows dramaturgy, he knows the comic timing, and nobody could figure it out. So we left him alone and let him do what he did the best, He was a gift to all of us.
Dion recalls meeting Gary Coleman during Different Strokes' first season.
My mother was the administrator for all the studio teachers that worked with the child actors in the business, and we went down to visit one of the teachers on set, and she said, I think you really need to meet this new kid named Gary Coleman, and that was the night that we actually met.
Gary also stars in The Kid from Left Field, a TV movie produced during his 1979 hiatus from Different Strokes.
I was cast as the bat boy for the baseball team, the San Diego Padres, which required that we go on location for a week and shoot in San Diego. And it was during that time that we really bonded. We were the only two kids on the entire shoot.
We had a great time together. Dion actually used my office to do his fan mail. He understood Gary, and they became very good friends. I can tell you that he had legitimate care for him.
By Different Strokes' second season, smart-mouthed, chubby-cheeked Gary is the show's poster boy.
It was, kind of the heyday of the network television. You had ABC, NBC, CBS, and Gary Coleman was the face of NBC at the time in the 1970s.
The money starts rolling in.
At that time, his life had changed, but at the same time, everyone's life around him, meaning individuals who were handling him, he watched their lives change significantly as well. People went from driving Chevys and Toyotas to driving Mercedes and Rolls Royces. He was keenly aware of that.
The actor's signature line, "What you talking about, Willis?" becomes a popular catchphrase.
That actually came from Gary. And someone said something to him very early on in the first season of Different Strokes, and he looked at them and responded with that retort, "What you talking about?" And they loved it.
I remember watching it as a kid, and you're sort of waiting for that moment where you would hear him say his catchphrase and kind of put that little expression on his face that, kind of drew you in and, made everyone laugh.
It was natural. It was not contrived. It was just Gary Coleman scripted.
But Gary grows wary of signing on to each subsequent season, citing his failing kidney and increasing fatigue as major issues.
Despite the confines of existing child labor laws, it was extremely taxing on Gary, particularly once he lost the very first transplanted kidney. It was oppressively brutal on his body and his mind and spirit.
The parents kept on saying, no, well, let's do this, we'll finish this season and then it'll be over, and then next season came. So Gary was not, I don't think, a very happy child, and he wasn't allowed really to be a child.
He knew that based upon the law of averages, that he was not going to live as long as a healthy person, meaning someone who did not have end-stage renal disease. So he knew that it was very important for him to maximize not so much the quantity of his life, but the quality of his life. And without question, he began to realize that the quality of his life was being significantly compromised.
Not everyone agrees.
He never worked when the doctor said he can't work. They didn't make him do anything.
Gary was absolutely ready to quit with Different Strokes at the top of season 4.
As the years pass, Gary becomes the show's main focus, while other cast members are relegated to the background.
You know, unquestionably, Gary was the star of the show. Everyone acknowledges that Gary was the meal ticket.
NBC pays Gary a reported $100,000 per episode, making him one of the highest-paid performers on television.
They were making money from him, and it was time for us to say, let's get his salary up to the equitable amount.
Gary undergoes his second kidney transplant during the show's 5th season.
He was transplanted with another kidney that he lost, that he only kept for 13 months.
From this moment on, Gary must undergo regular dialysis treatments in which blood is pumped out of his body, cleansed, and then returned.
He would do episodes of Different Strokes, and he would have to do this ritual, so to speak. It was a process that his mother would do for him and certain people would do for him.
Different Strokes ends its run in 1986 after 8 seasons on the air, and with money in the bank, Gary Coleman couldn't be happier.
And at that point, not only did he not care to do another television series, he didn't care to be involved in show business at all.
But he's in for quite a surprise. He has no money, and he blames his parents.
They were the enemy. Their opportunity to perform as his parents had passed.
His agenda was to tell him that everybody surrounding him was a crook, including me.
Actor Gary Coleman was born with more than enough charisma to make up for his ailing kidneys, but his glory days as Arnold Jackson on TV's Different Strokes are a distant memory when he dies of a brain hemorrhage in 2010. Utah litigator Robert Jeffs is appointed temporary administrator of Gary's estate and tries to make sense of Gary's various wills. But one thing is clear.
All of his wills or writings had identified that he did want to be cremated, but the court was reluctant to have that go forward under the direction of the competing claimants. So my appointment included the decision as to how to have the body cremated.
The court orders that Gary's body be cremated by June 18, 2010.
The court had ordered that a former friend and associate, Anna Gray, could see Mr. Coleman prior to the cremation, and in accordance with the judge's order, I allowed that to happen.
Anna arrives in Utah to say farewell to Gary one last time.
The funeral director and I tried to give her some privacy, and so we stood towards the back of the room, so I couldn't see how emotional it was. She did appear to be upset by the process, but was very appreciative of the opportunity to see Mr. Coleman one last time.
No one else requests to see Gary's body before it is cremated.
With the assistance of the mortuary, I was able to have them transfer his body to the crematorium after hours using a van rather than the normal hearse, so that we wouldn't draw any attention from the media and it could be the private ceremony that Mr. Coleman wanted to have.
The cremation may have been private, but Gary has lived his entire life in the spotlight, whether he wanted to or not. Different Strokes airs its last episode on March 7, 1986. By now, Gary Coleman has spent nearly half of his life as Arnold Jackson. He's ready to move on.
At age 18, Different Strokes was canceled. Gary couldn't have been happier. He felt completely liberated, completely free. And at that point, not only did he not care to do another television series, he didn't care to be involved in show business at all. His decision was to retire.
The decision shocks Gary's parents and advisors. Agent Vic Perillo has 3 projects lined up for his client. Gary, who needs time to rest, turns each one of them down.
He had one that he didn't even have to pilot. He had one that I developed for him that was in pre-production. And yet he came back from meetings with Mr. Meal and saying he didn't want to work anymore.
I have to say that that was probably the most significant point in time when Gary really disengaged emotionally from Vic Perillo, and he began to really question the role that his parents were playing in his life, not just as managers who were supposed to be making really judicious business decisions on his behalf.
But Gary is in for a surprise.
He says, well, the business manager's assistant called me again and says, I'm overdrawn on this checking account. I'm rich. How could I be overdrawn on this checking account? I've got lots of money. And I said, well, Gary, maybe you really are overdrawn. Well, how could that be? I still have checks. This is the level of misunderstanding that Gary entered his adult life with.
Despite having accumulated millions in earnings over the years, Gary learns that much of it has gone missing.
We estimated that he made almost $20 million. And of the $20 million, 47.5% of that came right off of the top in commissions and management fees for all of the handlers.
I keep hearing the figure of $18 million. I can't tell you what Gary made and what I negotiated for him, but it wasn't $18 million.
Quite frankly, Gary did not understand. He was not aware of what he was paying. He had no idea of what the percentages were.
Dion suggests that much of Gary's cut was mismanaged by his then business manager, but the accusation implies that others may have been involved as well.
I told him about the level of betrayal from all of those individuals who were supposedly his protectors and his handlers. I told him the truth.
He had an agenda. His agenda worked. His agenda was to tell him that everybody surrounding him was a crook, including me.
There was 10% to his agent, 7.5% of his income paid to his attorneys for legal counsel, and 5% to his then business manager.
Dion claims the largest cut, 20%, goes to Gary's parents for managing his career.
When Different Strokes went off the air, they went back and resumed their employment. Why would they go back to work for 22, 23 years? Shouldn't they be living in the south of France?
Gary did not perceive these people any longer as his parents. They were the enemy. Their opportunity to perform as his parents had passed.
Gary parts ways with his parents and with Vic Perillo.
He said, Vic, I think I want to go in a different direction. And he said, well, nobody's holding a gun to my head. Of course, I knew somebody was.
Coleman's not the only Different Strokes actor to encounter problems during and after the show. Todd Bridges battles an addiction to crack cocaine in his 20s and is acquitted of the attempted murder of a Los Angeles area drug dealer in 1988.
I think Different Strokes ends up being one of those sort of cautionary tales. Here are child stars who were sort of unsupervised, and we didn't think about the impact of living a Hollywood lifestyle.
Bridges eventually overcomes his demons and explores his troubled past in his book, Killing Willis. Dana Plato, however, is not so fortunate. Her character, Kimberly, is written out of the show's 6th season when Plato becomes pregnant at age 19.
There were times she wouldn't even show up for work.
After giving birth, Plato makes a handful of return guest spots on the show, but her acting career hits a wall. She's arrested in 1991 after the armed robbery of a Las Vegas video store and dies of a prescription drug overdose in 1999. Todd Bridges and Gary Coleman are at her funeral.
How do we end up with so many of these kids being on drugs and getting into such trouble after having such a successful career?
The industry doesn't destroy children. You see, it's the peripheral industry. It's the people that are surrounding the stars that eventually have great influence on actors.
Indeed, Gary is not immune to the perils of child stardom. Following the cancellation of Different Strokes in the mid-1980s, Gary takes a different direction and a new manager takes the helm, Dion Mial.
Simply by virtue of the fact that he trusted me.
Was he qualified? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. He had no business acumen. He had no knowledge. He would confer with me after we supposed to be making residuals.
We mobilized to create some vehicles for him, which we did. We shot a couple of pilots. They were not picked up, but he was delighted and always kept the faith.
In 1989, Gary Coleman files a $3.8 million lawsuit for misappropriated funds against his former business manager and his own parents.
It's always a very questionable and dubious position to be at such odds with your parents. For many people, it was inconceivable about how a child could sue their parents.
This entire court case had to do with the business manager. Yet we're hearing it had to do with the parents, had nothing to do with them.
Vic Perillo claims that Sue and Willie Coleman's only mistake was in putting too much faith in Gary's business manager. Dion Mial agrees, to a point.
They simply, at least early on, simply followed the direction of the business manager and the attorneys that were supposedly representing Gary's best interests. I believe, though, over time, once they realized how tough the game was and what the consequences would have been for them to turn against the regime, as it were, they decided to continue to side with the regime and not with their son.
In 1993, 4 years after he files the lawsuit against his parents, the judge rules in Gary's favor and awards him $1.3 million.
Gary felt so vindicated. For the first time in his professional life, he really felt that his voice had been heard.
When I meet people and they talk about the days of Gary Coleman, the first thing out of their mouth is it's terrible what the parents did to him. And I have to take a pause and say, if you tell a lie long enough in this world, eventually it becomes the truth.
The money comes at the right time, since Gary's acting career is in a real slump.
The public sentiment of Gary at the time was that he was sort of the stereotypical child actor. Had his 15 minutes of fame as a youth, and now was having his problems now that the spotlight was turned away from him.
Gary's unable to shake his character's popular catchphrase, "What you talking about, Willis?" a line that he will endure from well-meaning and not so well-meaning fans for the rest of his life.
The catchphrase sort of became sort of a caricature of him, and just constantly putting him in the box of being the smart-mouthed little kid on Different Strokes, when he was trying to get beyond that in his life.
Gary and Dion don't see eye to eye when it comes to managing the actor's finances.
The tugs of war became much too significant, and we both decided that it was just time to create some space and some separation in business if there was any hope that we were going to remain friends.
The two severed their business relationship in the late 90s.
There was no one who was dealing with him in such a personal way on a day-to-day basis to assist him with the management of his money. And within 18 months, he filed for bankruptcy.
Nevertheless, Gary drafts a 1999 will naming Dion Mial as executor. In 2003, Gary runs for governor in California's recall election.
Which a lot of people treated as a joke, and so did he, but the fact he knew what he was doing. He had ideas.
He loses, and the election further cements Gary's image as a freak pop culture curiosity. Gary now spends much of his time with close friend Anna Gray.
Anna is a friend of Gary's, and she was the CEO of the corporation that Gary created for his affairs.
Regardless of his earlier will, in 2005, Gary prepares another one, appointing her as his personal representative.
Gary and Anna Gray certainly started out as friends. I do know that they became very close. I do know that at one point, Gary had very clear intentions to move the relationship into something more romantic. But Anna Gray did not in any way, shape, or form have the same intentions.
Later that year, Gary travels to Utah, where he has a role in the independent comedy Church Ball. He takes to Utah immediately.
He wanted to get out of Los Angeles. It represented everything he didn't like about life. And then he does this film in Utah, calls me on the phone and says, "I'm buying a house." And within 3 weeks, not only did he buy it, but he was there.
Anna Gray makes the move to the farming community of Santa Quin with Gary.
I kind of joked around with him a little bit about that and said, "You really thought that, a short black man in a almost totally white community was not going to get attention?"
Well, I think Gary fit in about as well as any other California transplant would have fit in, especially given his past. He participated, in a bowling league at the local bowling alley and, was able to establish a network of friends in the area.
But his relationship with Anna Gray is about to hit a 5'7" stumbling block. Gary Coleman meets aspiring actress and extra Shannon Price on the Church Ball set, and the two hit it off immediately.
At the beginning of their time together, he absolutely loved her. There is no question in my mind that Gary loved her.
She's a pretty bubbly kind of personality, and they were getting along fine on the first few occasions that I met and saw Gary and Shannon interact.
From the very beginning, I could tell that this was a woman, a girl, who didn't have a good life herself and was not comfortable with the fact that she wasn't as important as he was. She was a little bit envious of his fame.
Shannon's arrival causes complications.
He wanted to move Shannon in, and Anna Gray had to go. Not because Gary necessarily wanted her to go, but Shannon would not have it.
I don't think Anna left without some degree of regret, because I think she loved Gary and cared about him and valued even their business relationship. And it's my understanding that she and Gary continued to communicate with one another on occasion and didn't ever really lose total contact.
2 years after meeting, Gary and Shannon get married. Gary changes his will again by adding a handwritten codicil or amendment to his 2005 will, naming Shannon as the new executor of his estate. By 2007, Gary Coleman has named 3 different executors to his estate, and none of them are aware of it. Little does he suspect that his relationship with one of them is about to take a darker turn.
She treated him badly. She would yell at him. She would make fun of him.
He was in fear of his life, simply in fear for his life, his physical safety.
Gary Coleman hits the big time as the precocious and smart-mouthed Arnold Jackson on TV's Diff'rent Strokes, but his life after the show is plagued with misfortune. Upon his death, he leaves 3 legal documents naming 3 separate executors, and one final question: who is Gary Coleman's rightful heir? May 28, 2010. Shannon Price has just authorized the discontinuation of Gary's life support. but she hides a secret that only she and a handful of others are aware of.
Throughout this time, the public believed that Shannon Price was the wife of Gary Coleman.
But Shannon is, in fact, not Gary's wife. News emerges after Gary's death that he and Shannon were secretly divorced in 2008, 2 weeks shy of their first wedding anniversary.
From what I understand, they kind of got in an argument one night, and they both took it a lot farther than most rational people would take it.
What motivated the divorce was Gary having moments of real clarity, understanding that he had made a grave mistake, that he had committed to someone, welcomed someone into his home who certainly was not out for his good.
The divorce is filed under the aliases John and Jane Doe.
We not only put it under fictitious names, aliases, but also sealed the file to prevent others from being able to open up the file and find out private matters about Gary.
He did not want this to come out, and he did not want to have to answer to reporters and to anyone else.
But then she said that they were so in love with each other that they couldn't be apart, so they continued to live together and not, let anybody know that they were divorced.
They did it in haste. I think they both look back and wish they did not get divorced.
Gary and Shannon continue living together, but as Gary's ex-wife, did she have the authority to terminate life support?
I think everyone was sort of suspicious at that point in time as to who she was, how was she able to do this, was it legal for her to do it?
Shannon's lawyer, Todd Bradford, points to Gary's Advanced Healthcare Directive signed in 2006.
That Advanced Healthcare Directive lists Shannon to be able to be the one to make any medical decisions on behalf of Gary, should he not have the right state of mind to make that decision for himself.
Obviously, Utah Valley Regional Medical Center was unaware of the divorce, and it operated in accordance with its standard procedure by following the directive that was on file.
Not everyone is convinced about the legalities of Shannon's actions.
From what I'm told, there was no way that he was going to survive, and why put him through it? I'm upset that she did it because she didn't have the right to do it.
Shannon only gave that okay after consulting with multiple doctors there, after being told that he virtually would be brain dead if he would even survive at all.
A spokesman for the Utah Medical Association defends the hospital's actions by claiming that a family member's wishes overpower what's written in a living will. Gary Coleman and Shannon Price succeed in keeping their 2008 divorce a secret, but they can't keep secret the years of mutual abuse each inflicted upon the other.
She treated him badly. She would yell at him, she would make fun of him.
Shannon would just grab Gary by the wrist and drag him around like a child, or call him, midget and other derogatory names.
He would scream back at her. They would throw things at each other.
In my discussions with the city prosecutor and the police, there was some frustration about the number of times they'd been called.
Gary was extremely self-destructive, particularly as the years passed on. He was extremely self-loathing. He did not believe in himself. In his own words, he felt at some point that he became God's punching bag.
This is far from Gary's first run-in with the law. In 1998, Gary is working as a security guard. One day, he assaults a fan who simply asks him for an autograph. The judge orders him to undergo anger management classes.
He had a temper, but I think he was also incredibly sensitive to how people treated him.
In 2005, he allegedly charges after another man while at the wheel of his truck.
There was a famous incident down at a bowling alley in Payson, Utah, where somebody took his picture and Gary is alleged to have assaulted him.
In 2009, both Gary and Shannon are arrested on charges of domestic violence.
Yes, they had their fights, more than most spouses probably fought. But did they ultimately love each other? Did they always make up after they would call the cops on a domestic violence? They always did.
Months before his death in 2010, Gary is ill and seeking refuge in a shelter. His lawyer, Randy Kester, gets a judge to issue a restraining order against Shannon Price.
Towards the end of their relationship, which was really the end of his life, he was in fear of his life. Simply in fear for his life. His physical safety, in fear of his life.
Most other times he could pretty much defend himself. I mean, he could talk trash just like anybody else, but at that time he was not in a condition to defend himself. And he just wanted some help to get her to leave him alone.
But Shannon manages to dodge the restraining order.
Technically, she wasn't in violation of the order because she had never been served and could say, I didn't know anything about it.
If Gary really wanted to follow through with that, he could have found her and he could have served her.
Gary eventually returns to their Santaquin home with Shannon.
She later claimed that it was with his consent and that he was asking her to come and get him, but that's not what I was hearing.
June 14, 2010, recognizing that the 1999 will naming him as executor is outdated, Dion Mial rallies behind Anna Gray to make sure that Shannon Price does not inherit the late actor's estate.
When Shannon Price came forth with the codicil, I knew that if there were anything that I needed to do on Gary's behalf, was to make sure that was negated. There was no way that I was going to rest and allow something that bogus to actually prevail.
Both Anna Gray and Shannon Price prepare their case for control over Gary's estate. Meanwhile, a police investigation into Gary's death is underway. Some believe that Gary's fatal fall is suspicious.
Anything is possible in a relationship when you're angry.
Following one-time child star Gary Coleman's death in 2010, two people are left fighting over his estate, ex-wife Shannon Price and Coleman's close friend, Anna Gray. While Shannon and Anna prepare their cases, Santaquin police investigate the nature of Gary's fatal fall.
The investigation by the Santaquin police would have included reviewing the stories and the 911 tapes for the calls to emergency personnel. It also included interviews of the ambulance personnel when they transported Mr. Coleman to the hospital.
There are many theories about the death.
Anything is possible in a relationship when you're angry. I don't know what preceded. Were they yelling at each other? I don't know. I wasn't there. None of us know.
At only 4 feet 8 inches tall, hitting his head that hard, it's not a long way to fall to the floor to create such an horrific injury.
Did he hit his head on something beforehand? I don't know. I always felt that it wasn't really very well documented.
As the police investigation deepens, Special Administrator Robert Jeffs tries to determine what assets of Gary's are at stake. He's in for a big surprise. The one-time superstar is almost penniless when he dies.
Normally, when a will is being contested, you figure there's going to be a large pile of money involved. But in this case, there was no actual money.
There were other items in the home that probably had some value. There was a couple of cars. I know the home eventually went into foreclosure because no one had the funds to make the payment or chose not to make the payment. I don't know.
Mr. Coleman had a real interest in trains, and he did have in his basement some significant area where he had built a stands for the trains to be set up on.
If someone told me that it was worth $50,000 to $100,000, I wouldn't be surprised.
But the trains are gone.
I'd heard from others that Shannon had taken a lot of the railroad things of Gary's and taken them to train conventions and sold off a lot of the train equipment and the train cars and that sort of thing.
The fate of Gary's train collection remains unresolved. With little to nothing left in his name, the battle over Gary Coleman's estate becomes one of personalities, not profit.
Both sides have admitted that the money was all gone. The house had been foreclosed. Right now, the only thing they were fighting over was Gary's ashes and his name.
Shannon Price begins to build her case. She needs to prove that her relationship with Gary qualifies as common law after they divorced in 2008 in order for the handwritten codicil to carry any weight.
And you have to prove that you cohabitated, which means basically living together as a husband and wife.
They had to treat each other as husband and spouse, meaning, did you both contribute to your financial well-being? Did you contribute to your physical well-being? If one was sick, did you take care of them?
You also had to hold yourselves out and gain a reputation within the community as husband and wife.
Meanwhile, in October 2010, Santaquin police closed their investigation.
That file was closed. I was never provided a copy of that file, so I don't know the details of how they determined that his death was an accidental death.
The police investigated the circumstances of Gary's death and found nothing suspicious.
It's very easy for people to think lots of wonderful, fantastic things.
On May 7, 2012, almost 2 years after his death, the battle over Gary Coleman's estate goes to court. Todd Bradford calls several witnesses who testify that Shannon and Gary did in fact live together.
Their tax preparer, the banker, Gary's agent, and a neighbor who all testified that Gary and Shannon referred to each other as husband and wife, and that they always presented themselves to people that way.
Then Shannon Price provides a Valentine's Day card from Gary as proof of his love for her.
But when asked, well, what did you do for Gary? She could not produce any notes or cards or gifts that she had given Gary to reciprocate.
Shannon's case has hit its first snag. The next day, Anna Gray calls her witnesses.
Anna brought in friends and a neighbor who testified that Shannon's depiction of their life as a fairy tale romance wasn't exactly happily ever after.
Audra Wright, a neighbor of Shannon's, takes the stand.
She testified about how Shannon would be verbally abusive to Gary, physically abusive.
Audra says the couple kept separate bedrooms.
Audra Wright saw both bedrooms, and Shannon Price said that they weren't sleeping together, but that she was staying at the house with Gary because her agent advised her that would be good for her acting and modeling career.
But there's more.
One of them testified that Shannon, while they were living together, post-divorce, but still living together, that Shannon had a boyfriend.
Shannon was seen with this man acting very affectionate in a way one would expect a romantically involved couple to act. Whereas other people said Gary and Shannon did not appear to act in that type of way.
Anna never attempted to subpoena him, to get a hold of him. He was never in the courtroom, never testified. I've never seen this person that these two testified about.
Even more troubling is that even in death, someone is trying to profit from Gary.
Pictures were taken of him while he was dying.
Gary's deathbed picture appears on the cover of a tabloid newspaper in the weeks following his death. It's not known who sent out the photo.
It's my understanding Shannon definitely did not approve that picture being sold or given to the magazine.
While there's no proof, some allege that she made money off the sale.
She made $10,000 off of that picture.
On May 14, 2012, the judge announces his decision. He rules that Shannon Price's relationship with Gary Coleman does not meet the definition of common law. Gary's handwritten codicil is annulled. Shannon is devastated.
She had a hard time. She went in hiding. She just didn't talk to anyone, didn't answer phone calls, just laid low.
On August 31, 2012, Anna Gray is named executor of Gary Coleman's estate.
I was absolutely pleased, but I wasn't surprised.
I believe that Anna Gray has some interest in trying to carry out Mr. Coleman's wishes as far as the disposal or keeping of Mr. Coleman's ashes, so I have every reason to believe that she will follow those wishes.
In October 2012, Shannon withdrew her petition to obtain Gary's ashes from the estate. Anna won't say where they are since, as she says Gary's final wish is to be left alone. Gary Coleman's life was an exercise in contradictions.
I don't miss his pain. I don't miss the way he was. I wish he could have been different. I wish I could have helped him to be different. Then I think I would miss him. But the way he was, no. I feel he is out of it and he's without pain. And that's something that makes me feel okay, that he's not suffering anymore.
No matter the controversies of his later years, people will always remember Gary Coleman.
Great performers, you see, have this magic about them. We don't stop talking about Lucille Ball. We don't stop talking about Milton Berle. We don't stop talking about great people. We're still seeing the reruns, you see. Gary is an old soul, you know. He was sent down to this earth to entertain, and he entertained everybody.